Ladies, gentlemen, and friends beyond the binary. Whoa, sorry, my microphone is not in the right place. Ladies, gentlemen, and friends beyond the binary, welcome to the Thursday Discourse for today, October 28th, 2021. I am your host, Tristan, the creator of Step Back, and also the co-host of the podcast that is now, I found out, number... You know what? I'm going to get the accurate numbers for you on all of these things because it's pretty cool. According to the Apple or the iTunes Apple podcast store, the number 42 highest ranking podcast in new and noteworthy podcasts, and new and noteworthy history podcasts, and the number 129th most highest rated overall history podcasts. It's Probably Not Aliens, which you can find wherever great podcasts are sold. Great thing to promote. Still a little soft? Well, I don't know what I can do about that. I'm in the yellow, so I'm in like the good zone for not clipping and stuff, so. Maybe I just need to turn the music down a little bit. Anyways, let me just get some stuff up here. Oh man, okay. I'm actually doing a pretty cool... We're recording It's Probably Not Aliens tonight. We're doing a pretty cool interview that I'm really excited to do, so it's on my mind. So yes, you can find my work at stepbackhistory.com for Step Back, or probsnotaliens.com for It's Probably Not Aliens. I stream on Mondays and Tuesdays. Mondays I usually do the Monday Discourse with Mia Mulder, who we had to reschedule because she's sick, but unfortunately she's still not recovered, so no Mia today, but we'll try to do something fun and different so that we're not just, I'm not just vibing for a couple hours. And on Tuesday nights, I do Step Back Tonight, which is a podcast, is a stream that it's just me and the audience, and we go over the news, and we answer questions, and all sorts of fun stuff like that. I go by he, him pronouns. If you want to support my work, you can go to patreon.com/stepbackhistory. Just a second, let me just silence my phone. I am just the most professional person today, apparently. If you want to support my work, you can go to patreon.com/stepbackhistory, where you see videos early for as little as 84 cents a month. And for as little as the $5 a year tier, you get to vote on the topic of the next Step Back video. You can also support my work if you have Amazon Prime by going to Twitch. By giving me a Twitch Prime subscription, you get one per month that costs no extra money to you. So if you want to use it, use it. And if you use it on me, I'll be very grateful. What else? If you have a little bit of money burning a hole in your pocket, anything like, super chats, bits, Twitch subscriptions are all welcome and appreciated. It's what keeps this whole thing going. You're gonna help me buy lots of diapers soon. As far as content to check out for, the latest video of Step Back is called Are We on the Brink of Mass Starvation? It's a video about overpopulation. The latest episode of It's Probably Not Aliens is about the Piri Reis map, sort of like, 16th century Turkish map that might show the coast of Antarctica several centuries before it was discovered. And also, my next video that I'm working on is on Project Cybersyn, which was sort of an attempt to use a computerized network to plan the Chilean economy during President Allende's rule, and was, only stopped, had a lot of promise, but it was only stopped because of a fascist coup in the country. So that'll be a fun little history video on Step Back. What a weird, strange thing to do. And if you want to submit questions to the stream, I'm going to put a link in the chat for you to check out. This is a place where you can submit questions for future streams. I hang on to questions for a month after they're submitted. So if you hang around and become a regular and you ask questions, you're helping keep the content filled on this, and you might get your question answered. And especially if you have a question for my Tuesday show, because my Tuesday show doesn't have a whole lot of questions in the bank right now, so very likely to get to it pretty soon. Next up, too, if there's anybody who this is their first time, is Thursday a new day now? No. Thursday is the day that I typically use if for some reason Mia can't make it on Monday. Mia was sick on Monday. We were hoping that she would get better by today, but she unfortunately has not. So this is usually a backup day. So if this is somebody's first stream, please make yourself known in the chat, please, because we've got a really fun and active community here that would love to get to know you a little bit better. So just thinking about how pretty this camera is. It makes me look really good. And I get to do a little bit of a depth of field, so you can see that the grate there is a little bit blurry. It's very nice. Very nice. Okay. Reschedule your Tuesday show to a more favorable time for me, and I might drop some questions for your Tuesday show. Yeah, fair. I mean, I think, Pim, you're in the Netherlands, if I remember correctly, and this Discourse stream, is supposed to be my European-friendly stream, while the other one is supposed to be my, North America-friendly stream. So that's the way it's supposed to work anyway. Yeah. Other than that, and yeah, I can't do a podcast at either 9 a.m. or the middle of the night for the people in, Australia or in East Asia and stuff like that. I feel like that'd be a bit much for me. Let's see. But yeah, it's been a good day. My first time watching the stream, been subbed for a bit. Well, nice to see you, Craig600. So I was thinking I could talk with you guys for a little bit, and I don't know, maybe I can get some, maybe I can find a way to get some cool videos to watch. I have sort of one video that I've been waiting on to watch that I feel like might be interesting for the audience if I were to watch it my first time without to sort of a reaction, and that is John the Duncan's video on left-wing white supremacy. I'm very curious about what's in that video, I don't know what else we can do, but I want to do something a little bit different, and that video looks really good, so thought it might be a cool thing to riff off of. But if anyone has any other recommendations, I don't know if the chat here is going to actively suppress links, but we can try some stuff. But otherwise than that, before I can probably talk to you guys about stuff too. Otherwise, we can just get going, I guess. You submitted a question? Nice. Let me take a look. Let me take a look at the old question bin. Do I want to burn through all of my Tuesday night stream questions? Probably not. I would probably yeah. St. Andrew's video on leftist disunity. I have mixed thoughts about it. That'd be pretty cool too. Anyone see Dune? It slapped. Yeah, it did. I want to talk about it a little bit more on Monday with Mia here, though. I've been holding out on the real Dune talk because I want Mia to be here for it. Just in case I forget, some high schoolers here in Ottawa organized a chase off a transphobic bigot. Nice. Did it snow in Ottawa yesterday? I saw some like live footage of a place that looked like Ontario, but it had snow. And it's not quite cold enough for snow here, so I thought maybe in Ottawa they're getting snow or something. We're getting a La Nina effect this year, so the winter's going to be particularly cold and snowy. Anyways. No snow, okay. I would say no spoilers, but I have read the book. Ah, well, you know. Do you know of Conlang, speaking of Dune? Yeah. There's several. Like, you know, Klingon's the famous one, but also somebody fully fleshed out the Dothraki language for Game of Thrones, which I thought was, you know, pretty cool investment. And I think there's a handful of other ones. Basically, that's what Tolkien did. That was his main hobby, and the fiction was just a side project to inform the language, if I remember correctly. You haven't watched Dune yet? I hope it's really good. I really liked Arrival, but wasn't the biggest fan of Blade Runner, so I guess we'll see. I really like Dune. I thought, like, Denis Villeneuve's sort of aesthetic worked really well with the story he was trying to tell. So, I don't know, let's watch. See, the John the Duncan video is like 42 minutes long, so it might eat up the whole stream, is a thing, depending upon how much commentary I have. But if not, then, you know, we can pick up and do more stuff. And I can pause and answer questions and chill with you guys for a little bit. So maybe we'll watch it in, like, you know, chunks or something, like 10-minute chunks, and then I'll stop, answer some questions, move on. That sounds like fun. That's a bit more ADHD friendly for someone like me. All right, let's get it open and get the audio up, and we can pause the music. And, ooh, it's so quiet. All right, guys, here we go. We're going to watch John the Duncan on left-wing white supremacy. And go.
Break down every day to the dialectic eliminate. You gotta choose one, can you play? It's time.
Maybe watch it at 1.25. Okay, yeah, 1.25 doesn't sound too wacky, so we could probably do that.
For a change. TikTok is in a clock, you just flip up onto the spot. Can you feel it's getting hot? It's time for a change. Yeah, times are changing.
In the past few weeks, I've become profoundly disappointed with the state of white-dominated spaces on the online left. To my discredit, I still had some degree of hope for some people. I didn't expect the simple point of listen to the colonised about their own oppression to generate such a mass boiling of piss on the online left, and yet here is the piss.
Oh yeah. This is true. This is the thing that everybody's thinking about right now, because it's absolutely fucking insane how one extremely stupid content creator has just turned an army of just the absolute worst people and stirred the discourse in just absolutely grotesque directions. And it has uncovered that there is still a really strong white supremacist streak within the online left. And if you buy into that, go fuck yourself. And you're gonna learn why I would feel that way. So yeah, here we go.
And see how it's boiled. What these last few weeks have really underlined for me is just how profoundly correct tweets like this from No Name are, and how profound.
What's this? Why are white leftists more eager to unify with racialized communities than organizing your own people first? Unity with black people is meaningless as long as masses of white people are indoctrinated into white supremacy and liberalism. Please don't speak to me about police.
Committed to white supremacy figures on the online left like Vosh truly are.
Wokely segregating my socialist movement wokely.
We're going to come back to this tweet later on and unpack the various different levels to it, but for now let me sum up the issues that have been sparked recently and how I'm going to use them to discuss decolonisation, whiteness, and the...
Tell us more, please. I'm going to let John say it, because on these kinds of topics, I think John knows a lot more than I do. Keep in mind, I have advanced degrees in American culture and U.S. and U.S. history. that's my like area of things that I know about. I dabble in a bunch of other things, but I think John the Duncan's like actually like he's in grad school for something. I think poli-sci. I think he knows a lot more about this kind of stuff than I do. And so it's better to just listen to people who know what they're talking about rather than, I don't know, act like a certain YouTuber that I'm circling my cursor around who does zero research but has absolute confidence that he's right about everything.
White supremacy that permeates the left. Here at JTD, we like to reach into the gaping maw of discourse and try and like rip something generative from its abysmal reach. So this latest round of shite was really kicked off when everyone's favourite dipshit Vosh.
Also, just shitting on people, just being angry with a Scottish accent is just much more enjoyable to take in.
When he debated a black creator, Professor Flowers, during which he spent a great deal of time conflating decolonisation with ethnic cleansing and trying to call her a Nazi. Truly, we are entering the House of Reason.
But I've talked to white nationalists, and they kind of talk exactly like how you talk.
In online circles, this sparked a round of what can only reasonably be described as white people collectively shitting their pants. But what's important here is that this isn't something which is just confined to the online left and all their weirdness. Our weirdness, oh god, I'm one of them. But this exists offline as well. It's endemic throughout the entirety of the white left, particularly in the global north. So today we're going to start talking about why framing decolonisation as genocidal is just straight up wrong, why violent resistance to the coloniser is justified, and what the demands of the colonised are, before talking about how whiteness as an oppressive social object is created through colonisation and slavery, and finally how so many of the left are still so committed to white supremacy. The point of this isn't to add more drama to the ever-mounting pile of beef. Beef me!
Makes me very, very happy, by the way, that John is getting a lot more attention lately. This is a YouTuber who I felt flew way under the radar compared to the quality of the stuff he's putting out, and I'm glad that it's starting to pick up. Now, if only we would do that with St. Andrew, everybody. Come on.
I will be making fun of dipshits when I can, because, like Marx, I too am a messy bitch who loves drama. But really, I want to try and urge people who exist within white left spaces to really try and reckon with the ways in which we are still enamoured with white supremacy. So often do we hear ritualistic calls to raise up black and indigenous voices, which are true and we should listen to them. But I often feel that this leads a lot of white people to lapse into laziness, to not talk about or not confront the white supremacy that exists within our own spaces. That's what I want to challenge here, because it's not up to racialised people to constantly have to explain their oppression and justify their positions. Like No Name's saying, it's up to white people too. So we're starting off the discussions of genocide early for a JTD video. Am I the genocide and neoliberalism guy? Is that my brand? Can that be a brand?
What's his YouTube channel called? This YouTube channel is called John the Duncan. All one word.
We'll get to the beef later.
Or St. Andrewism.
But for now, it's
one
genocide.
I was talking about.
Since the charge being levelled at colonised people is that classic settler fear of retribution, that the colonised want to genocide white people, I'll first explain here why decolonisation isn't genocidal, but is inherently resistance to genocide. I mean, I could here just say different things are different and leave it there, because this is a ludicrous case to have to make, but I will make it nonetheless. Firstly, I think it's important to point out that despite its dulling through its institutionalisation in international legal codes, genocide, as it was first conceived of by Raphael Lemkin, had an inherently colonial character. Lemkin described the genocidal process as the destruction of the national...
Confronting structural racism, isn't that critical race theory? Huh. Yeah, it's almost as if critical race theory is useful for understanding things. That's weird.
...pattern of the oppressed group and the imposition of the national pattern of the colonial oppressors. This doesn't just mean like your classic mass killings, mass deaths as genocide. That was a weird way to describe it. But it means the destruction of people through cultural destruction and assimilation too. In fact, for Lemkin, physical and cultural genocide aren't two distinct phenomena, but different expressions of one underlying process. And he expressed the
other thing too, the reason I wanted to watch this is just because I have been getting, I guess the euphemistic word I'll say is frustrated at how quickly so many weirdos in the online left have just basically reproduced, just reproduced the term white genocide with no what's it called? With no irony, like they just changed the wording slightly, and then blame Professor Flowers for being a enabler of white genocide, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my god. Professor Flowers is good and has done nothing wrong. I'm just going to put that out there right now.
Deep regret when he couldn't get cultural genocide into the Genocide Convention because of blocking by colonial powers. Fucking Churchill. But what's really important here, and quite interesting actually, is how Lemkin's view of genocide bears a really striking similarity to Patrick Wolf's influential conceptualization of settler colonialism as having
both negative and positive dimensions. Negatively, it strives for the dissolution of native societies. Positively, it erects a new colonial society on the expropriated land base. As I put it, settler colonizers come to stay. Invasion is a structure, not an event. In its positive aspect, elimination is an organizing principle of settler colonial society rather than a one-off and superseded occurrence.
The dissolution of indigenous ways of life is a constant process of settler colonialism, whether that's through physical destruction or the expropriation of...
More men should yell at Churchill, yes. I one of the things, and this is not as a defense of Churchill, and so I'm not going to, don't take it as such, but one of my favorite things is that Boris Johnson is fucking up so bad as Prime Minister. And one of the things about Boris Johnson is that the guy worships Winston Churchill, who probably, I imagine, is up there. If you were to make a list of like the top 5 most like revered and well-known prime ministers in UK history, I'm sure Winston Churchill would make high on that list. And yet, and just to watch Boris Johnson, a guy who literally I think he owns a huge collection of Winston Churchill's personal effects and stuff like that, and wrote a book on him, wrote one of his biographies, to just watch him absolutely fall on his face, which is actually more akin to how Churchill actually was when there wasn't World War II happening, but that's a different story.
Land and the assimilation into the settler state, whether that's through the brutal residential school system in Canada, the kidnap and assimilation of Indigenous children in Australia, or through land expropriation and forcing Indigenous people into capitalist social relations. One really clear way that we can see this is through the constant dispossession and privatisation of Indigenous land for the purposes of development and extracting profit. Worth noting as well that this extractivist development is deeply entwined with global warming. Look at the way that Indigenous lands are expropriated in the Amazon.
She did do one thing wrong, talking to Vosh and expecting good faith. Yeah, Vosh is just a verbal abuser who uses hours-long debates to essentially strong-arm people into saying one line that he can then twist into unimaginable dimensions to claim that he won a debate, because he doesn't care about being right, doesn't care about understanding. He's a abuser who just wants to win. And if somebody actually in this chat, if somebody in this stream actually thinks themselves as a fan of this person, you've got to really interrogate internalized ideas of white supremacy and patriarchy and what kinds of toxic aspects you really appeal to you, someone who is just so blatantly horrible, basically.
For the purposes of clearing forests, or in North America for oil extraction, it's all tied together. Since many, not all, but many Indigenous groups see the land as part of their way of life, the expropriation and destruction of that land for profit is simultaneously a destruction of Indigenous cultures and ways of life, and also frequently involves carceral violence and the murder of Indigenous people too. Another bright video from me.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
This is a process inherent to settler colonialism, as one Indigenous activist, Alf Priestley, put it.
Aboriginal people are the land. We are connected to the land, trees, rocks and waters. Aboriginal people have been forced to sit on the fence about this. Either way, our land is being taken away from us. There is only...
If he's such a bad person, why has ContraPoints come on his show multiple times? I mean, I consider Natalie a acquaintance and someone who, we have mutual understanding of each other, and I respect her work. Not exactly known as a paragon of good decision making when it comes to who she associates with now, is it? So, yeah.
The 17% of vegetation left in Australia, and that's because these farmers and cities have cleared the land to put crops in and to build big towers.
The land is always stolen land in a settler colony, taken and pushed into ownership models. It's worth noting here as well that collective ownership is still a form of ownership, right? It still subscribes to this white settler epistemology, which we'll get to later, which separates the people from the land and is inherently contrary to indigenous ways of life. See my video on debate culture for a discussion of this Cartesian epistemology, which
I can't remember if I've seen that video. I probably should.
is central to this discussion. One shameless plug. So far. The only way to halt this genocide is to return stolen land, break down all notions of ownership over that land, and support the colonised unconditionally for their struggle for true self-determination. A struggle which is necessarily anti-capitalist. Such self-determination just can't be won through assimilations into the settler state. As Coulthard argues in Red Skin, White Masks, the structures of recognition in settler states like Canada serve only to force indigenous people into capitalist modes of being, into settler colonial modes of being, and thus maintain access to the land for the purposes of extractivist capitalist development. They do this by both distancing themselves from a previous settler colonialism, a bad settler colonialism, not like the good settler colonialism that fluffy Canada has now.
What is that? So 300 years ago, their dad showed up and they were born 18 generations later, and that means they're a colonizer?
And they're still...
And by framing and subordinating indigenous self-determination to the edicts of the settler state. Indigenous nations aren't viewed as self-determining nations, but as subordinate parts of the settler colonial state. As Harry Nelson argued with a statement signed by 236 Indigenous residents of Australia.
These assimilation policies.
Genuine question, are there ideological divides within land back, e.g. more capitalist or socialist or different modes of it? It's not like there's not like the land back movement that has the president of land back and like the organization. It's just a principle. And yeah, I imagine that there are some people where it means that there's like, about returning resource, but for the most part, like the most moderate or like liberal versions of land back stuff is about like just making sure that the people, the reserved land that the people live upon is like habitable. Like, people don't realize this, but like in Canada, we've got hundreds of Indigenous reserve communities that have been on boil water advisories for decades, which means that this place functionally doesn't have potable water. And governments have been promising to fix it for ages and have done nothing about it. It's really fucking stupid. Okay, we got a shit disturber in the chat here. Alrighty. There's another person who follows only the person who only read the one Wikipedia paragraph, so bye. Anyways, yeah, like land back stands for a lot of different things. It definitely is more of like a rallying cry or a focus of how Indigenous activism should move forward, and rather than like, because like in the past, and a lot of times there was stuff about like, oh, Indigenous people should organize to be a political base to increase their, standing within society and like all sort of like, get themselves more of the basic necessities of life and get all that kind of stuff taken care of. But now they're, coming to the, realization that the white supremacist colonial society is never going to look out for their interests. It's never going to do anything for them. And the only way for them to really have a world that is not actively trying to squeeze them out of existence is to get self-determination one way or the other, either by getting the state to hand over land that rightfully legally belongs to them, or in most extreme cases trying to dismantle the settler colonial governments that are still to this day trying to eradicate them from the surface of the world. So there's that.
Policies destroy our culture and our lives. It is the stolen generation all over again. The government is refusing to build us any housing unless we sign over control of our land for 40 years or more. We say no leases. We will not sign.
That's the other thing too, is not giving any more land over to settler colonial projects.
Government having this control is no good. Our lives depend on our land. It is connected to our songlines, our culture, and our dreaming.
So, to briefly summarise all that I've just thrown at you, genocide, as it was originally conceived of by Raphael Lemkin, is inherently colonial in character. And on top of this, Patrick Wolf's conceptualisation of settler colonialism has clear continuity, striking similarity, I'm still quite surprised by how similar those things are, with Raphael Lemkin's idea of genocide. And taking these two together, we can see how the continued process of separating Indigenous people from the land, dispossessing them of their land, is inherently genocidal. It destroys Indigenous cultures and ways of being while implementing white, settler, capitalist social relations, while also continuing to physically destroy, kill Indigenous peoples. It is then not only deeply, deeply fucking gross for figures like Vosh and others on the online left to draw equivalencies between land back and ethnic cleansing, and decolonisation and ethno-states, but it is entirely intellectually bereft. Different things are different. Different things are different. Different things.
Remember when Blanchet compared Quebecois to First Nations people in the debates despite being a settler himself? Oh, yeah. Quebecois people, French Canadians in general, myself being among them, have a sort of weird place in Canadian history that's sort of akin to Afrikaners in South Africa, where we are settlers, we are settler colonists, and just because the English conquered us later does not mean that we are in some way part or victims of settler colonialism, or that we are in some way, absolved from the crimes of the settler colonial states that we benefit from, and the white supremacist side that we grow upon. Now, while there's legitimate political issues to talk about, like Francophobia is a pretty big deal in Canada, hatred of the French language, and the continued project to assimilate Quebecois culture into the mainstream English culture, that stuff is stuff to be concerned about, but I wouldn't frame it anywhere close to the issues of settler colonialism.
Things are different. Different things are different. Different things are different. You even see dipshits labeling land back as privatization, which is just a wild thing to say.
Land back is privatization of public land. I don't understand what's vague about that.
Oh my god. Okay, so this is such a ridiculously stupid take, because first of all, they're not handing it on to individuals or corporations. They're handing it on to communities and nations that they belong to. Second, a lot of public land that they're talking about in this case is land that is set aside by the government for lease to extraction corporations in order to basically pull wealth out of the ground. Like in Canada, our public land that rightfully belongs to Indigenous people is being held by the federal government in order to be leased out to forestry companies, to mining interests, to oil and gas interests. And Indigenous people would like to get that land back mostly so that they can block those things, because they don't want their waters being poisoned by fucking bitumen mining operations. They don't want their society to. They don't want their water poisoned by copper mines or iron mines, or they don't want their lakes and rivers being diverted or destroyed by hydroelectric dams. And also, they don't want their fucking old growth forest being chopped down in the name of increasing quarterly profits for Woodco or whatever. It's this is such a intentional misunderstanding of this thing to make a white supremacist argument. I'm absolutely blown away.
Oh, hang on, wait. I'll make it sound like paper coffin.
We do not live in communism, and neither do Indigenous people. This is simply creating a new place for the fundamental contradiction to occur.
Do I have a link for the questions poll? For questions? Yeah, there's a link here. Put it in the chat.
But you can't see this is questionable.
That's what they sound like, right? American.
And if there's one thing folk like this hate, it's being called a dipshit. Their entire fucking thing rests on people thinking that they're smart, they're authorities on things that they don't know anything about.
Bitumen mining, that can't be a real name. Yeah, it's bitumen. Sorry, I kind of like slurred it there. It's bitumen. Bitumin, I think. It's basically sand, dirt, stone that's mixed with tar and has been highly compressed, so it almost has the consistency of like clay or rock. And if you mine that out of the ground and do a treatment process that involves a fuck ton of waste of turning fresh water into just super highly toxic sludge, you can make oil. And it's how Canada produces most of its oil, and it's possibly the most environmentally destructive way to take oil out of the ground on Earth.
I'm gonna be very, very petty for a second, just to raise the mood a little bit. We've talked about genocide too long.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
But the way Vosh constantly talks about being a sociology major, or how other people would get thrown out of sociology departments for their ideas, is just... it's so lame. It's like, that's so lame, man. What's that about? What? I don't get why would you say that?
Your sociological analysis would get you laughed out of any undergraduate degree, and I can say that with the absolute confidence of a person who didn't get laughed out of my classes.
Listen, why don't you think of me more as a peer?
Like, I could make an intellectualized argument about how, you know, maybe it reveals a deep commitment to the legitimacy of Eurocentric models of epistemology and of knowledge creation like the university, and which would explain his inherent opposition to, you know, indigenous ways of being. But I also just want to call him a dork and stuff him in a locker. Anyway, decolonisation is not genocidal. It is the means by which we finally put a stop to 500 years of colonial genocide. And as such, it doesn't require our moralizing.
Yeah, I guess you would have been laughed out of a like sociology class to be anti-colonialist. But that's mostly a comment on the academy, because the academy is still, especially in like those like hardcore social sciences like sociology, extremely white supremacist and extremely like colonialist, and still very like state centric. So yeah.
Or our hand-wringing, it requires our solidarity, even if it makes us uncomfortable. And so we have to briefly talk about... If we accept then that the settler colonial state is inherently genocidal in character, despite what someone like Caleb Maupin might have you believe about the value of US patriotism in the US settler nation state. Caleb Maupin, by the way, is a man who always looks like he's in the middle of a job interview that's going really, really badly. Like someone's just asked him what he's been doing for the past few years. What's this gap in his CV? And he has to say, well, you know, spreading weird misinformation about random e-celebs, talking about Burger King. What's he supposed to say? Oh, what a bizarre man. Anyway, but are we really going to wring our hands about violent resistance? As Frantz Fanon points out,
national liberation, national renaissance.
I do like how a lot of these like people like Maupin, I don't know about Coffin, but I know that like Jimmy Dore is getting in, like they are just all now full anti-vaxxers. It's absolutely wild. Like that's basically all Jimmy Dore is picking content about these days, is anti-vax stuff and pro-horse-paced stuff.
The restoration of nationhood to the people, commonwealth, whatever may be the headings used or the new formulas introduced, decolonization is always a violent phenomenon. Decolonization, which sets out to change the order of the world, is obviously a program of complete disorder, but it cannot come as a result of magical practices, nor of a natural shock, nor of a friendly understanding.
You know, the left is often quick to recognise that revolutionary politics requires a degree of violence, whether that's in like resisting state violence or appropriating the property of the capitalistic class. But as soon as it's about decolonisation, suddenly white leftists get kind of jittery. They start worrying about white genocide and violence. They start worrying about the methods of the colonised that they use to...
Yeah, I've been getting that in my streams for the last like 2 weeks.
To fight against their genocide? Like, what's that about? I know what it's about, but you know.
Peter Coffin's on the horse paste thing.
Not that it's the responsibility of...
It's the least surprising thing I've ever heard in my life.
The colonised to give one solitary fuck about what settlers think about their means of resisting colonialism, of fighting for their own liberation. Like, they're resisting a genocide. But again, I guess it should be reiterated that colonised peoples just don't want to wipe out white people. They don't want to wipe out all white people. This is a manufactured fear.
I just think that you're enacting some kind of petty revenge fantasy where you know that you've been the...
Are people attacking St. Andrewism? I mean, he's a black man on the internet, so it would not surprise me at all if random people are attacking St. Andrew, despite the fact that he's smarter than any of you guys, myself included. He's another one of, like, possibly one of the smartest people on this platform who gets absolutely no respect. You guys couldn't hold a fucking torch to that guy. Yeah.
victim of racism your whole life, and it gives you, like, I don't know, what, some satisfaction of reciprocating
is that
even in revolutionary wars like the Haitian Revolution, where some white people, you know, the ones who wanted to keep...
Yeah, someone, Riki, is correct. Who's going after St. Andrewism? I will personally fight them. Me too. I will literally fight you. In any, you get to choose any gym in Michigan, and we will have fisticuffs.
Owning people were expelled from Haiti. White people who fought alongside the revolution, who fought with the colonized, with freed slaves, they were allowed to stay because, you know, genocide wasn't on the cards. Liberation was. The role of violence in liberation is not to commit genocide, but to overthrow systems of colonial domination and halt the destruction of indigenous life, land, and culture. It's liberatory. In fact, this hollow fear of the colonized as like these base, violent peoples is an essential part of the construction of one of the most devastating tools of violence in history. Throughout all this recent horseshit, there's been a consistent call from, unsurprisingly I think, largely people in the debate sphere to get black and indigenous people to say that they condemn any potential white ethnic cleansing. If you want to know why that's unsurprising, you should watch my video on Debate Bros and the debates.
I actually, after the stream on Tuesday, where I got accused again of basically enabling white ethnic cleansing or whatever, I looked up if there was any like white ethnic cleansing that's ever happened in the history of decolonization. And it's always been when a major action of decolonization happens, like an overthrow of the government or some major change, that the white people who live in the country leave, they emigrate en masse because to them, equality looks like oppression. Probably the biggest one that I could think of was when the anti-colonial forces destroyed the Belgian army base in Leopoldville. The 15,000 white people living in the Belgian Congo left. And, you know, that doesn't bother me that much. Given, even just thinking like of a fraction of what the Belgians did to the Congolese people. Nah.
Fear, which is shameless plug number 2. As we've already talked about, this isn't what colonized people want at all. But what's also important...
By John the Duncan's logic, where do post-Ottoman nation states fit in? Most of them expelled their Turkish populations who came there via conquest. Yeah, I mean, it is... it's a form of settler colonialism, yeah. It's what's it called? It's not exactly a fun, happy time. No, I wouldn't say that. It's gonna be chaotic. It's gonna be violent. It's also decolonization and getting empires out of countries. Like, yeah. Like the Turks definitely did empire. They were way more chill about it than the Europeans were, but it was still empire. It was still a oppressive colonial system that they held over a good chunk of the Middle East, and yeah, so it's like, yeah.
Important is that whiteness isn't an ethnicity, but a racial category, which is constructed around the domination of other racialized groups and is specifically constructed on top of settler colonialism and slavery. These hollow fears of white genocide promoted by like these debate-pilled social democratic piss artists serve to reify the idea of whiteness as just a neutral social category, and not as one which continues to function as a means of domination. As Horn points out, when colonists first reached the shores of what would become the USA, they were a heterogeneous, multi-class, multi-religious, multinational group. But soon,
England, the scrap.
I mean, were the Ottomans doing settler colonialism, e.g. Armenian genocide, or were the nation states doing genocide? I know it's a far more lenient system, but we also got Balkan nationalism. Were they also doing... Okay. So there's okay. Hello. Oh, thank you, John Barlich, for the $2 super chat. Do I have a video on the Ottoman Empire? Kind of. I have a very old step back video that talks about the role the Ottoman Empire played in basically forcing getting Europe to try and find another way to Asia, which led to the finding of the Americas. But that's a different thing. And I do have one on the Armenian genocide, which I made earlier this year that I'm a pretty big fan of. But the decolonization process of leading to all sorts of weird post-war nationalisms and stuff like that is part of the decolonization process that's messy and can lead to bad stuff. But to then be like, hey. But a lot, especially if you're talking about things like Balkan nationalism and stuff like that, there's a difference when when you can blend yourself into white supremacy. And while there's still a lot of suffering and stuff and a lot of economic depression going on in the Balkans, a lot of Balkan nationalism has been tying into white nationalism, hence why so much Balkan nationalism was so friendly with, say, when the fascists showed up, when the Nazis showed up, and has been usually used to weaponize as a attack on people who live in the Balkans who are Muslims, mostly. So, yeah.
Scrappy Protestant underdog moved toward pan-Europeanism, or whiteness, incorporating Scots and Irish and Welsh in the first instance, those with whom they had been warring for centuries, and then moved toward incorporating others who had been warring. British versus German, German versus Pole, Pole versus Russian, Serb versus Croat, the list is long. All of a sudden, when crossing the Atlantic, in a manner that would make Madison Avenue blush, all are rebranded as whites, which subsumes many of the tensions, ethnic and class among them, in a new monetized and militarized identity politics of whiteness, based on expropriation of the indigenous and mass enslavement of the
There it is.
Africans.
Similarly, in Black Marxism, Cedric Robinson argues that
The myth of white solidarity arose and came to dominate American sensibility. It was, for the most part, a lie, but a terribly seductive one. By the end of the 19th century, it had already substantially displaced the past and mystified the relations of the day. It remains in place.
And while it's certainly true that previous to settler colonialism, slavery and capitalism, conceptions of racialization did exist, with the dawn of the colonial capitalist order, whiteness, white supremacy and the domination of all other racialized groups became an essential and foundational part of the global capitalist order. And with the embedding of settler colonialism and racial domination as whiteness into the material structures of global capitalism came a white settler epistemology, whereby Western knowledge and liberal norms of individualism, of Cartesian dualism and of private property came to define who had worth and who didn't, who's human and who isn't. Another shameless plug. For example, John Locke's view seems like a tame word for what is essentially justification for genocide. John Locke's view that indigenous modes of being didn't confer any property rights over the land for indigenous people justified the expropriation of that land and the extermination of those.
There you go. Good, Morty, got it. Whiteness is itself the system. Yes. The label of whiteness and being integrated to have the status of whiteness is a process of being part of an integrated, militarized identity politics that has benefited for centuries off of the oppression and exploitation of people who are outside of that identity group. Yeah. There you go.
People in the name of a superior white European race, a superior white European way of life. This white settler epistemology is central to ongoing racialization and oppression. There is no separating whiteness from the settler, despite whatever ill-informed word vomit Vosh spews into your ear over the course of a live stream about, you know, essentializing the white race or whatever the fuck he's talking about.
I mean, how can a person be an oppressor because of their race? Did all the millions of white people in South Africa, like, individually oppress all the black people there? It just seems weird to be retaliatory in that way.
The fact is, the idea of the white race is built on slavery, colonialism, and domination. There is no separating that.
Someone just said about how like whiteness isn't necessarily a skin color thing, it's like a status. And all I can think of is how there was this incident during apartheid South Africa where Japan was trying to make like some treaty with South Africa. And as part of the treaty, they made it so that Japanese citizens who came to South Africa would get the title of honorary whites. And I was like, oh, fuck.
This white racial frame was instrumental in creating the international slave trade, the colonization of large swaths of the globe, and in establishing contemporary, heteronormative, and patriarchal social relations. White supremacy is not only a rationalization for race, it is the foundational logic of the modern capitalist system and must be at the...
Did South Africans fight Japan? I don't know, but this is, I mean, they were probably part of the British military order or whatever, but which means that there was probably a lot of fighting against Japan, but this was after World War II.
Center of efforts to understand the significance of whiteness.
So if you saw my video on neoliberal feminism, so shameless plug again, shameless plug, shameless plug, shameless plug, shameless plug. So if you saw that video, you remember that I talked about how before colonialism in Europe there was the idea of women, but after colonialism there was white women and racialized women. It's a relational process, it's dialectics. I've not said dialectics for a while, just reminding people that I am a bit Marxist as well. Dialectics, dialectics, dialectics. You know, every Marxist has to say the word dialectics at least 3 times a day or they come and steal your badge. Whiteness creates the category of blackness, of racialized otherness, and the only way to get rid of that, to free us of that, is not through genocide, but to abolish the category of whiteness entirely, which necessarily requires the abolition and the destruction of settler colonialism. Because whiteness, the native and blackness were all created through slavery and colonialism, it's necessary to fully abolish colonialism to abolish whiteness. To frame that abolition of the structures which produce the category of whiteness and the many, many oppressions which stem from that as a genocidal process is to be innately on the side of whiteness and colonialism. It's to be a proponent of continued indigenous genocide. It's to be on the side of white supremacy. Despite the fears of colonial retribution from white settlers, whether they're fucking debate streaming social democrats who think they're anarchists or just your garden variety dipshit, the goals of decolonization aren't about...
I feel like I was attacked there. What's it called? I have in my career in this industry, which I've been in now for 2022, it'll be 7 years, have been called everything from a rad lib all the way to a tanky. So I guess I win at being extremely hard to clock, I guess.
Reversing domination, they're about shattering the structures and ideas of capitalism and colonialism which constantly reproduce oppression. Abolishing whiteness isn't genocide, but freedom. So far we've talked about how decolonization isn't genocidal, but about resisting genocide, and how settler colonialism...
I know he was talking out, I know he was calling out Vosh again. He's not the only person who is like a self-described anarchist who then spouses a lot of like very social democrat to liberal political takes. He's not alone in that. He's just probably the most popular one. Have I been called an anarcho-liberal? No, that's a new one.
Domination are essential to the construction of whiteness. So now I'm going to talk about how white supremacy, despite what a lot of people might think, isn't just a phenomenon of the far right, but something which permeates the left too, and needs to be rooted out. So let's get back to the terrible tweet we started with, and really start boiling that piss. What this tweet does is it reveals an attitude which is frighteningly common.
Oh man, what's that meme? Can I borrow some pixels, man?
Among white leftists, that emancipation must be subordinate to the ideas and moral values of white people.
Wokely segregating my socialist movement wokely.
For Vosh and many, many others like him, the movement belongs to him. It belongs to white people. And anyone who challenges, who dares to challenge his idea, his notion of how the movement should exist, deserves to be driven out and mocked. One way in which this white ownership of the movement is expressed is through ring-fencing anti-colonial resistance within a moralistic Western frame, which still subordinates Indigenous self-determination, a prerequisite to stopping colonial genocide, to the moralism of the settlers, and therefore inhibits true self-determination and maintains that genocide.
They have to have their own autonomy to decide what happens after being colonized by people.
Well,
and again, I don't
limits,
think that's
right?
the solution.
There's a lot of genocide notches on that board. Forget how grim these videos are until I'm actually laying it out like that.
John comes from a strong step-back pedigree in that. What's it called? I think before John started making YouTube videos, or before he started taking off, he was a regular in the step-back Discord. So you can, I don't claim influence, but definitely coming from the same branch of the intellectual tree. In that sense.
I am working on the chicken run video for patrons. If you want the one JTT video that's going to be just a bright light of shining appreciation for the best piece of art ever produced, then sign up to my Patreon. Because otherwise it's just genocide from here on out, apparently. In subordinating black radicalism and decolonisation to the demands and fears of white leftists, people like Vosh are placing their own fears and legitimacy above the material demands of the colonised and the oppressed. It's literally a racial hierarchy. The attitudes of these, let's call them what they are, left-wing white supremacists, reminds me of this quote from Black Marxism.
If you were a colonist, you knew that your technology was superior to the Indians. You knew that you were civilized and they were savages. It was evident in your firearms, your clothing, your housing, your government, your religion. The Indians were supposed to be overcome with admiration and to join you in extracting riches from the country, but your superior technology had proved insufficient to extract anything. The Indians, keeping to themselves, laughed at your superior methods and lived from the land more abundantly and with less labor than you did. They even furnished you with the food that you somehow did not get around to growing enough of yourselves. To be thus condescended to by heathen savages was intolerable, and when your own people started deserting in order to live with them, it was too much. So you killed the Indians, tortured them, burned their villages, burned their cornfields. It proved your superiority.
I think there is a consistency between the attitude described by Robinson here and the attitudes of white leftists towards black and indigenous struggles. There's an idea that we have all the answers, that we have superior technology, education, morals, analysis, and that they should be deferent to our greatness.
I'm starting to wonder if you're educated enough to have this conversation.
If they don't toe our line though, if they don't conform to our parameters, then it's like being condescended to by them. So instead of listening to them about their own struggles, white leftists will drive them out and delegitimize them as liberals or revisionists or even fucking Nazis. This is a legacy of whiteness on the left. This is a legacy of white supremacy.
Oh man, this is going to be the next section. I plan on at some point making a video that I think is going to be real fucking spicy. That's going to be about the U.S., specifically in American history, the American left and racism, and specifically how the American labor movement was defeated by racism, and that I think it will be and about how in America anti-racism and like the struggle for ending class oppression are the same thing, because so much of your class position in America is defined by the racial category you belong to that you really can't separate it. And yeah, it's just...
And coming back to the tweet and focusing on what No Name is saying for a second, we can see that she's plainly and obviously correct. Just obviously correct. Why should white leftists, who are clearly still enamoured with white supremacy, be able to go to black and indigenous spaces and demand a solidarity to a movement which is not extending a jot of solidarity to them? Why should they be able to do that? As Horn points out,
the attempt to build class unity without confronting these underlying tensions often has meant coercing oppressed nationalities, blacks in the first place, to co-sign a kind of left-wing white nationalism. Black failure to do so leads to our denunciation, in today's terms as identitarian.
demands like Vosh's here to Forced solidarity from black and indigenous people is exactly what Horn is talking about here. For the left-wing white supremacist, solidarity is not the necessity to support your comrade in their liberation, but the demand to subordinate them to yours. And if black people like Professor Flowers or St Andrewism have the gall to disagree, then they're denounced as wanting to genocide white people. And in doing so, like Horn argues, these left-wing white supremacists hand rhetorical attack lines to the right, like connecting decolonisation.
Yeah, man, if there's anything that's going to drive me fucking crazy, and I said this earlier, but the fact that Man Bun Man has essentially made a left-wing argument for the white genocide conspiracy and has mainstreamed it to in such an absurdly quick fashion is going, that's the kind of thing that's going to make me just have absolute rage.
And genocide, which served to stop people questioning the legitimacy of settler colonialism and, by extension, white supremacy. Yet still figures like Vosh and Caleb Maupin and any number of this coterie of ghouls still profess to support decolonisation and anti-imperialism. And how do they justify this? How do they square this with their obvious and repeated fears of white genocide and land back? They see it as a social justice campaign, not as a demand to return stolen land, halt the destruction of that land, and in doing so, halt a genocide.
Now, if we're talking about other policy to redistribute power or address differences or stuff like that, then absolutely.
Through its reduction to a metaphor and subsumption within already existent social justice campaigns, decolonisation, the liberatory process, the material demands, are defanged and made palatable to a white supremacist left. And talking about decolonising the curriculum, or talking about decolonisation as a civil rights campaign rather than a material demand to return stolen land, we simultaneously subordinate decolonisation to settler frameworks and continue the assimilation process.
He said he doesn't believe in white genocide repeatedly during that debate. It's weird, because then his entire argument against Professor Flowers is, why do you want to do white genocide? Why are you people supporting white genocide? And it's like, oh, I mean, he doesn't call it white genocide. He's just like, oh, decolonization is white genocide. Therefore, like oh, whatever. Ugh.
Process which maintains the genocide against the colonised. Left-wing white supremacists like Vosh can at all times invoke decolonisation to get some moral points, get some legitimacy, while at all times working to delegitimise true decolonisation and maintain white supremacy. We saw a very real example of this in the non-online left, when Indigenous activists during Occupy Oakland called for a recognition that Oakland was already occupied territory, and the goal...
The chat is showing very clearly that there's a lot of you who should not be subscribed to me. But anyways, I'll just continue.
Should instead be to decolonise Oakland through land back rather than to reoccupy it. Settler participants in Occupy reacted not with solidarity with their oppressed Indigenous comrades, but with suspicion. They instead began to question whether their solidarity would risk their position in settler society, whether it would risk their ownership over the land. Decolonisation for these settlers, these left-wing settlers, was limited to the metaphorical sphere, and solidarity couldn't be extended to anything as materially dangerous to white supremacy and settler colonialism as land back. Solidarity is extended right to the point at which it begins to challenge settler colonial social relations, and in the moment it does, that solidarity is renounced.
Yeah, framing decolonization as white genocide is a very long and old story. Like, what's it called? That was the argument people made about desegregation when they were desegregating schools. They're like, this is going to destroy the white race. Ending slavery in America, there are people who are like, the blacks are going to be so angry being freed from slavery that they're going to rise up and kill all the whites. And it's like, this story comes up over and over and over again. Whenever processes of decolonization are risen.
And the denunciations begin. We see this so clearly with figures on the online left like Vosh, who claim to support decolonization up to the point at which it unsettles their position in society, up to the point that it unsettles their whiteness, at which point they begin to aggressively delegitimize it while trying to subordinate the struggles of black and indigenous liberation to their white supremacist left social movement. This
Wokely segregating my socialist movement, wokely!
Is not solidarity with the wretched of the earth. This is an attempt to maintain white supremacy. A couple of weeks ago, I met an indigenous activist from Ecuador. She spoke about how her land, her culture, her people were at constant war against the system of global colonialism. How that system ate the souls not just of her people, but of the oppressors too. And she couldn't rely on the solidarity of white leftists in the global north, because we didn't understand what it is, what's happening. We didn't understand that her people are still being attacked every day. We still don't understand what white settler colonialism is doing. We're still pathologically connected, enamored with white supremacy. Colonialism is eating our souls too. And you know what? That's fucking tragic. That's fucking tragic. The people who need our solidarity the most, real solidarity, not solidarity with a shadow, can't even rely on us. The people who by rights should be among the most ready to give it, the most ready to fight with them, not leading them, but with them. And she can't rely on our solidarity because what? We're too scared of losing the benefits that we reap from her genocide. It's fucking tragic. And it's an embarrassment, frankly. This whole ordeal has been an embarrassment for the left. Even in our spaces on the online left, where the fucking bar is don't drive out black and indigenous creators by insinuating that they're Nazis and subjecting them to months-long harassment campaigns, do we fall over the fucking bar and smash our smug, bearded faces into the fucking dirt. And yet still demand deference and solidarity from those same creators, from those same groups. People are surprised that BreadTube or whatever is so white when this is the fucking state of it. What a fucking tragic state. I'm not saying that if you didn't previously show sufficient solidarity with the colonised that you're forever morally compromised. But how about instead of eating dirt, we take a lesson from Fiere's Pedagogy of the Oppressed or from Catherine Walsh and realise that rather than being slave to white supremacy, offering knee-jerk reactions mocking or condemning the demands of the colonised, we consider our place within global capitalism. We consider our place within settler colonialism, act with, not for the oppressed, and show our unconditional solidarity to the colonised across the globe, from Abya Yala to Palestine to West Papua. Maybe we can begin to make amends for the fucking state of the white left.
Oh
Jesus
shit.
Christ. There's that. We're done. Video's over. We're finished.
Nice. God. I held out on watching that video for far too long. That was really good. Yee. Gotta say, John the Duncan, fucking... That's why his last name's Duncan, because he's always throwing slam dunks. That was... that was a bad goof, but, you know, there we go. I'm gonna post on Twitter. Yeah. Very well done video. Yeah. Yeah. Protect John the Duncan thought. Can you suggest a video? Sure. Just make sure it's not too long. What's it about? That's the best question. Because I know that by opening up this door, I'm opening myself up to a flood. Summarize? Yeah, sure. The white left on the internet is fucked up because we refuse to... What's it called? We refuse anytime that that black and indigenous people of color have, challenged white supremacy. Everyone starts to feel like get all defensive and angry and start calling them fascists and supporters of genocide, and then go and wonder why there's no people of color in like the online YouTube space, in the online left YouTube space, and it's essentially because we keep thinking that our interests, our issues are more important than theirs, and if they don't show deference to the left, to the white left, then then they're, branded as, every horrible thing and subjected to harassment campaigns and all that kind of thing. And maybe we should stop that. Don't accidentally restart the reactor. No, I don't plan on it. Game Beyond the Iron Curtain, East Germany. It's about East German video games. Sounds like it could be fun. I'm not a video game connoisseur, but let's see what we get out of this. Get a nice, relaxing Game Beyond the Iron Curtain. Oh, here it is, right here. Looks like I've started it at some point, which means I probably at some point put in a yeah. All right, let's watch something more fun. Let's get the blood coming down a little bit, because I should not make my stream should not be shortening my lifespan. This is supposed to be fun, and I am already my heart rate's already above my resting rate, so I'm already worked up, so I need to chill out with some communist video games. Let's do this.
After the end of World War II, the world was split into two, East and West. This marked the beginning of the era called the Cold War. The Computer Game Museum in Berlin, located in the eastern half of the city on a miles-long stretch of open-wide road called Karl Marx Alley, has a back corner specifically set up to showcase high-tech artifacts from a country that no longer really exists. East Germany, the so-called German Democratic Republic, or GDR, was the home of about 16 million people who had to watch the rise of companies like Atari and Nintendo from the sidelines. Here's a metaphor. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, but in the case of Americans trying to get a hold of Cuban cigars, they instead represented the difficult intersection between politics and luxury, not unlike East Germans trying to get a taste of the rise of video games during the mid-80s. The demand was there. The demand was huge, in fact, but the literal and figurative wall between East Germany and capitalist luxury meant that their games were copies of what people had in the West, and they were made by developers who were under-equipped with knowledge of what they were even copying. There are still Germans to this day who would probably be surprised to hear that the GDR had video games at all. In 1949, the COCOM embargo was enacted by Western countries preventing their companies from exporting modern technology to the Eastern Bloc. And by the 80s...
And someone talking about the Queen. Why does the Queen claim she owns 91.5% of the land, the other 8.5% belong to the church? Good question. I wish that was not a thing. Queen should be unqueen. Well, I don't want to get your hopes up, but I think she's kind of sick right now, isn't she? I don't know. Fingers crossed.
That list included computers and electronics. The economic isolation of Soviet countries, plus their government-planned economies chasing after the Marxist ideal of small, self-sustaining communities, meant that supply and demand did not decide what ended up on the market. Government policies did. GDR factories had a hard cap on how many computers they were allowed to produce, and it wasn't enough to sell them on store shelves to the general population. During the months when this system worked, it provided basic necessities at very, very cheap prices. But luxuries like video games were never going to be a big priority, and properly sustaining the system in the first place relied on a workforce that wouldn't leave for the temptation of Western luxuries, which meant that the system didn't work. One-way immigration was the defining problem troubling East Germany's economy throughout all of its history. The country's location, within range of Western TV and radio stations, meant that despite strict censorship laws, the people knew about computer games and had reason to get a hold of them. So in the early 80s in the GDR, demand for Western tech was high, and production for homegrown Eastern computers was beginning to trickle into the 5-year plans of various Soviet influence.
I do have to say, there's a lot of reasons why the Soviet Union and the kind of communist bloc did not do super great as the sort of 20th century moved on. But this one is one that doesn't get as much attention, which is that the communist bloc, first of all, was a little bit more skeptical about the power of computers, and over time started getting further and further and further behind on the development of computer and software engineering. And by the end, they were just stealing it. And I think that was one of the things that really hurt the Soviets. That was that they did not prioritize developing their information technology, because it led to a huge boom in capitalist countries. And it was a thing that I guess the very conservative leadership of the Soviet Union just didn't think was important enough to throw into.
Governments. So although Nintendo released the NES in West Germany in 1986, importing the machine into East Germany wasn't allowed by Western governments. While on the other side of the curtain, Eastern governments wanted that technology but couldn't import it. But an even higher priority was that they did not want the media that technology could play. Data storage like cassettes, discs, and cartridges weren't allowed through customs. The official reasoning was to prevent Western propaganda from going through the borders. The real reason was more likely to keep the temptation of immigrating to the West out. So while it was legal for an Easterner to bring back a video game machine, traveling outside to get one was a process that required so much paperwork, interviewing, and disposable cash that it was out of reach for most East Germans. Older pensioners had less travel restrictions than normal citizens, so the usual method was to have a wealthy
Soviet weren't gamer enough. Yeah, I know, for real. But like, I know that like it sounds like it's a gamer thing, but like, if you think about what computerization did for industry, for business, for not just like business, but like logistics and like all these kinds of things, the fact that the Soviet Union was always so far behind in developing computer technology really, I think, really hurt it. And you can see as like the 1970s, as computers start to become a more and more large part of the way business and industry function, that the Soviet Union starts really stagnating and falling behind.
Or grandparent bring over a Western computer to nerdy grandkids back home. So another popular method were these Gen X catalogs, gifts to the GDR, where wealthy Western relatives could send poor Eastern relatives gifts. But this was really only for the filthy rich. The goods were funneled through neutral nations, and all those middlemen had to get paid somehow, in addition to the GDR government itself. So about 200,000 Commodore 64, ZX Spectrums, and other Western computers did make it over there, but they could only get there by being imported informally by individuals. There were no big businesses doing this on a real commercial scale. Meanwhile, the Russian solution to these problems, their unofficial NES clone, the Dindy, wasn't to be released until 1992, a couple years after David Hasselhoff tore down this wall. Until then, East Germans were just stuck with knockoff Pong machines that cost as much as a month's salary. So if you were an East German kid growing up in the 80s with average working class parents, PC gaming was the more realistic and popular choice, as it still is right now in Germany. But back in the 80s, kids with the most powerful and expensive machines in the GDR still had to make a lot of compromises. The bizarre rules, contradictory inefficiencies, and clever workarounds faced by gamers living inside this country is archived.
Were there rich people in the USSR? I mean, technically no, but there were definitely side benefits for being like members of the party and being high-ranking officials, yes.
At this museum. And what fascinated me for days after leaving this place was how different a lot of the GDR's technology was, despite the idea being to copycat a lot of existing Western tech. The limiting material shortages and factory allowances is something visible all over the exhibit, like on this vinyl record disc that has computer software loaded onto it. For a few years of the 80s, vinyl LPs were a cheaper storage medium over there than cassettes or floppies, not to mention the occasional instances where audio-encoded software was broadcasted over the radio. But all of that wasn't super relevant when it came time for a customer to just buy a video game. But it was a hugely limiting factor for the would-be developers at the top of the supply chain who could have been making games during that whole time. The technology embargo and the shortages were the two factors that decided that the gaming market of East Germany and of other bloc countries would be dominated by crappy pirated knockoffs for decades, even after the fall of the Soviet Union. To see these abstract policies in concrete action, here's a more personal story, a spiel on computer spiels, as told by German game developer André Weisflog. Nowadays, he's programming for a company called Big Point Games, whose latest big project was a freemium RPG called Drakensang Online, but decades earlier he was one of only a handful of people to ever make money programming games in the GDR. As explained by memoirs on his website, plus in an email conversation between the two of us.
Clone of some kind. Didn't the Soviets create Tetris, which was the first video game? It wasn't the first video game, but they did make Tetris. Yes. A Soviet citizen did make Tetris. But the first video game was like made in the 1950s by like, it was called like Space Blaster or something weird like that. And it was played on like a weird scope thing. It was very, very weird and old.
André Weisflog grew up making his early games in 1987 on the KC-85/3. It was an 8-bit East German computer
BBC
that
used to broadcast software code on the TV? Oh, jeez. Is that to get it to the Soviet Union or what?
Clone of an American chip from 1976. And though this was cutting edge in the East, it was running at about half the speed of the closest Western machine, the ZX Spectrum, which also used the Zilog Z80s, except theirs were the real deal. Although the development of a reliable clone of that chip was a real breakthrough moment for the East, and although their engineers were squeezing more capability out of the KC-85 than the original late 70s computers the chip was intended for, these factors here explain why a lot of Eastern gaming trends across the whole region seem to be stuck at a half-decade behind the rest of the world. And back in late 80s East Germany, the stuff they were putting out looked more like it was from the early 80s. But before all that, André didn't have a home computer of his own, so he joined a local computer club that would divvy up time on Z1013s at neighborhood schools. And
first I remember was Pong. You're either old or like me, you got a bunch of weird shit from a grandmother who was really into garage sales. Because when I was a kid, when all my friends had Super Nintendos and Game Gears and all those Sega Genesises and stuff like that, I had an Atari that my grandmother had found at a garage sale, and I played that.
And those were computers that could only output 32 by 32 pixels of ASCII artwork when they weren't displaying black and white lines of text. The KC85/3 represented the next generation of possibilities to make and play games, but its price tag of 3,500 East German marks was roughly equivalent to about one-third of a low-end car, and it was payable in a currency that you couldn't buy a cheaper Western computer in if you could find one. That put it out of most people's reach. In addition to that, normal citizens weren't even allowed to order one. The idea of distributing everything...
I ain't knocking age. I'm like older than most of the people who frequent social media right now.
To those that needed it most meant that high-end office equipment was reserved only for business customers. Luckily, Andre Weisslog's parents had a craftsmanship business, so they took a huge leap of faith by switching entirely to self-employment, thus allowing them to mail order their son a KC85/3 for the family office, which was on paper the business's office, except it was really the living room because they had to plug it into the family TV. Meanwhile, back at the KC85 factory, production was more focused on pocket calculators. The entire country's worth of computers were being made at a rate of 6 units per day, so Andre had to wait 6 whole months for delivery.
Yeah, Space War. Space War was the game I was talking about.
In the meantime, he played games, the best way he knew he could, which was a yearly fair organized by his town that had a guy show up who'd set up a tent, put a bunch of Western arcade cabinets underneath it, and modify them to accept GDR coins. This was the only way you could play older Western arcade games like Pac-Man and Pingo, so Andre would play the hell out of them for a few days, memorize how they worked, and try to deconstruct them in his brain. Then he'd go home and reconstruct them on the KC85 so he could keep playing them later. Some of his arcade clones are still playable today in a browser window with an emulator he made. And what caught my eye was how he would publish his home address on the game's starting screens. As it turns out, it was a common practice to post ads in tech magazines with your address on them so you could share and even develop software with other gamers elsewhere in the country. Floppy disks were typically too expensive for this, so if it wasn't cassette tapes...
Man, you would not see that in a capitalist country, that's for sure.
Software being mailed, and it was printed out pages of source code itself. Because sometimes these guys were debugging and building new software with each other through the magazine through the mail. Slowly but surely, a small scene of homegrown East German game development cropped up, and word of Weisberg's games spread up to the company that made his computer. They paid him to update his games for the upcoming KC85/4, although he doesn't actually know if those games ever made it to mass production. This is the method that other game developers were being hired for to make another notorious GDR staple, the Polyplay, the one and only arcade cabinet built in the country, and for many East Germans, this was the only arcade machine available at all. The Polyplay is a piece of gloriously tacky 70s wood paneling that uses the same Zilog Z80 clone chip to power a cabinet offering a selection of 8 games. All of them feature the kind of barely animated grid-based movement that you usually saw in early PC games rather than in the arcades in 1986. For comparison, know that this is the same year Outrun and Gauntlet 2 came out. The Polyplay games don't just look but also feel behind their era as well, with the analog joystick snapping you in and out of very digital, stiff 4-way movement, because it's not really a joystick at all but a lever mashing down on 4 buttons below. This is a piece that the museum has since apparently had to replace with a more familiar lollipop design. While authorship of the individual games here remains unknown, the Polyplay's origins as a government project
It is pretty impressive to play games and remake them from memory. Yeah, that's true.
overseen by the East German secret police, the Stasi, became known in the mid-2000s, and I'm not even kidding about that. The Polyplay served a double role as both a recreational source of entertainment, but also as an international propaganda campaign. After news that violent video games, like River Raid and Commando, were already being banned in West Germany in the 80s, East Germany used that as an opportunity to preach that Western countries were poisoning their children on violent media. In printed media, video games are written as being inhumane and cruel. Most historians point to a 1989 Funk Amateur article called Bombs, Bullets, and Slaughter, in which the author rails on the violence glorified in Western games. But of course,
Funk Amateur.
If the case was that the games were being made by fellow comrades instead, the party line changed to, quote, computer games possess subjective tendencies to convey the ideas and values of socialism by means of play and fable. So what did the East German government do in response to the Western government restricting the freedom for their citizens to buy violent media? They, restricted the freedom for their citizens to make any violent media at all. As far as the rest of the world needed to know, East Germany's games were going to be the most peaceful and wholesome of all. So anything that ended up on the official government brand Polyplay arcade entertainment device, which ended up in government brand swimming pools, game halls, and other rec centers, as well as the government headquarters.
I was learning a little bit more about this because, like, I was watching a thing on artistic censorship within the Soviet Union for cartoons specifically, and that they had like this whole like Soviet or socialist realist idea, and that anything that kind of had like that broke from the sort of rules of this art form were censored for a very long time. It's very interesting.
In the East German palace had to meet a secret rating standard enforced by the government's Secret Intelligence Bureau, which meant no war games were allowed, no violence at all for that matter. Even shooting down invading UFO spaceships wasn't allowed. That minigame got pulled as soon as one teacher complained about it. So the polyplay they have up and running at the museum in Berlin has a Pac-Man clone. There's a game where you have to bucket up a bunch of water and throw it out the window. You can go skiing. There's kind of an interesting gimmick happening in that one. You have to keep making sharp turns or else you speed out of control. Among all the games here, the only creatures that have to die are the deer in this hunting game at the top of the list, which plays like a worse version of Robotron 2084. And there was a morbid joke about this game being tossed around at the time, that it only made it through and got included because Erich Honecker, East Germany's brutal leader of its final 20 years, the guy who would later face trials for the refugees shot at the Berlin Wall, enjoyed hunting in his spare time. GDR's homebrew PC game developers might have gotten hired out to make that stuff, but even what they did on their free time at home didn't escape the eyes of the authorities, as seen in the case of Raimo Bunsen's Revolution. This is a game that has you shooting down USA-backed Honduran Contra rebels to save the Soviet-backed Sandinistas.
Oh, man.
You think the Soviet-influenced authorities
I'm based as shit. I want that game. I want that today.
would approve of this as a propaganda piece, right? You play on their side of the proxy war. Nope. Weeks after releasing this game, Bunsen's father was suddenly called into the office of his party's secretary and grilled about how irresponsible he was to be letting his son program war games. Bunsen would have only been 12 at the time. 3 years later, in 1989, Ronald Reagan tears down the Berlin Wall and it's all over. The polyplays are recalled and recycled for scrap. The companies that made the KC-85 are dissolved and sold off to private investors. KC games themselves stop appearing after about 1992. Once the wall fell and superior Western computers came pouring in, KC-85 developers like Raimo Bunsen had their specializations become obsolete overnight. They were very quickly thrown away in favor of Western tech. After making a bunch of games for free and then getting in trouble with the secret police for it and then being stuck knowing a computer no one wanted to work with, Bunsen decided to become a lawyer instead. So even after reunification, it seems to take almost a decade for the laws to change, skills to be redeveloped, and money to be saved all over again before East Germans are finally able to publish and sell high-quality original video games on par with the rest of the industry. But the lingering effects of a half-century of Soviet influence has left East Germany economically behind its western half, even to this day. The majority of the most famous German games come from companies headquartered in western cities, founded by kids who grew up in western cities. Here's a list of a GameStar editor's favorites, in no particular order, but picked because I felt it would be more representative of the local tastes than like a list from Forbes or something. So if you ever need an example of the complicated intersection between politics and entertainment, look no further than these stories explaining what it was like playing video games in East Germany.
That was wild. Like the ET game. See, here's the thing. I'm pretty sure, like 90, no, not 90, that's a bit too sure. I'm like 70% sure I had a copy of that game, which makes me think that at some point in the 90s, my mom threw away an Atari with a set of games that was probably worth a goddamn fortune, which is super weird. Just like how I'm also reasonably sure that so here's one thing that happened, and that is apparently in the 90s, my mom got me, this is going to be the most 90s thing you'll ever hear. My mom got me a Tamagotchi for Christmas one year, but she hid it in the garage and apparently lost it. So at some point, when my parents are planning on moving out after they retire, which is going to be next year. So in the next couple of years, they're probably going to have to clean out the garage. And there's like a non-zero chance they're going to find a still in its case 1995 Tamagotchi. And something makes me think that eBay would pay good money for that. So that'd be quite wild. But yeah, the technology gap in the kind of communist bloc definitely caused a lot of problems, and it's definitely what, in my mind, it's one of the things that set the communist bloc more and more behind as the decades wore on. You're glad that you never had a Tamagotchi? Oh. Make sure they don't throw it away. Yeah, I'm gonna make sure they look out for it because it could be worth something. Actually, I wonder what it's going for. Let's see. Let's go to eBay. Tamagotchi. Bandai original 1996, 1997 Tamagotchi in English. Oh, one is only selling for about $50. So, I mean, probably a lot more than what they paid for it, but still. Hold it for another 20 years. There you go. And in the case, though, yeah, it looks like it's in the case. Stonks. Yeah. Tamagotchi stonks. Maybe I can put the music back on. The case wouldn't be in very good condition, but the thing would still be perfect unless it got wet. Yeah, I don't imagine it would have gotten wet. It stayed in a garage, but who knows? I also had a holographic Charizard from the first run of the Pokemon card game, and I don't know where that ended up, but I imagine that I think that's worth quite a bit today, so yeah. That's life. There's a bunch of dumb shit from the 90s that I had that would have been worth a lot if I had, not just thrown it out as part of growing up. But also, the fact that everyone threw it out as they grew up is sort of the reason why they're worth so much today, so makes sense. Do some media manipulation to start a Tamagotchi speculation bubble. Yeah, just like, what's it called? Like Jim Sterling did for those Boglin puppets or whatever. According to Google, not all Tamagotchis are the same. There are some that can be worth up to $2,000. Damn. Yeah, I'll what's it called? I'll have to check that out when my parents actually pack up. Because yeah, that garage is a rat's nest. There's so much stuff in there. You okay with having me here if I just don't bring up Vosh? Sure. Would suggest maybe some introspection on that front, but if you're going to refuse that, then whatever. You had so much slime and grime, kids? Ha. Yeah. The 90s, like, for some reason in the 90s, we were obsessed with slime, like, as a concept. Like, when I was a kid, there was a television mascot called the Snit, which was literally just like a blob of purple goo with robot arms. And it hosted stuff on YTV, which is sort of like the kids TV network. So, yeah. It's because of Nickelodeon. Yeah, Nickelodeon probably did do it, yeah. But also, the 90s was like was also stuff like, that was when creepy crawlers became a thing. If you guys remember that. But, creepy crawlers, Dr. Dreadful's Food and Drink Lab. I mean, kids today make slime, don't they? So I guess it's come back. Except now they make it themselves with, like, Gak. Oh my god, Gak. Holy shit. That digs up some real old memories. Garbage Pail Kids. I had some Garbage Pail Kids. Goosebumps had a lot of slime. Yep. Solar Gak. There was like these like garbage pail kid things that I had as a kid where you would get like a bag, like you get like it would look like a garbage bag, and you put it in water, and the bag would dissolve, and the toy would come out of it. It was pretty sweet. I had Ivan Ooze from the first Power Rangers movie. Oh yeah, fucking Ivan Ooze. I remember that. That was like the Power Rangers movie. I remember that. That was a wild movie. That was a wild time when Power Rangers was at its peak. Like, wow, this was a really weird show for everyone to be into. And then they had a bunch of knockoffs afterwards, like the Beetleborgs and the one that I liked the most, which was Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad, which is actually the name of the show. And it was about a kid that turned into a robot inside computers and fought evil computer things. I don't know. It was obviously like a Japanese show, like kind of like a live action kaiju-y type show, where they took all of the fight kaiju scenes and then they filmed their own show to fill in the stuff that was not that. And it was what's it called? It was such a weird show. But it featured things like "Let's kick some gigabutt," which I thought was a very fun term to say, because gigabutt, it was pretty good. And then I also learned about when I was talking with my wife that there was Reboot, and apparently Reboot was mostly a Canadian thing. I did not know that. I thought Reboot was like everywhere, but apparently Reboot was a nope. It was a Canadian thing mostly. The other one I remember was, I didn't watch this one. This was a little bit when I was starting to get out of, aging out of this genre of show. But there was the Knights of Tir Nanog, which was sort of like a Power Rangers, but Knights or something like that. And if I remember correctly, Reboot also was on the air for a while, and then it got off the air, and then they brought it back, and it was sort of this like semi-grimdark show about the kid from the first show who got lost on the internet and came back as like this sort of like, oh, I'm so grim and dark. I don't know. That show went some weird places. Reboot, the animated show. Yep. Reboot was dope. I agree. See, the thing is that, and this will say a lot, I actually kind of stopped watching TV when I was a teenager. I kind of just got out of interest in TV shows. So all of the shows that I watched were like when I was a kid. And then as I kind of got to like high school age, I just stopped watching TV for the most part. And I never really picked it up again. So yeah, like most of my TV memories are from like the late 90s. Even sort of fell off Star Trek for a bit. Yeah, what's it called? Star Trek was a thing that I only came in and out of when I was a kid because my dad was a fan of it. So if there was something big going on, I would watch it, and then I wouldn't. And then I got really into Star Trek around the time Nemesis came out when I was in high school. I was like I think I was in grade 9 when Nemesis came out, and then that kind of waned, and then I kind of just didn't get back into Star Trek until I was an adult. So I've actually like now only recently watched all the Star Treks. I also didn't participate a whole lot in like internet stuff between the years of 2010 and 2013 because I went to university, and at university, the place I lived had very limited internet, and I was just very busy with like, real life stuff. So when I was, so for those years, I didn't really follow along what was going on the internet. And that was when I became surprised to find out, like, I left home and went to university, And at that point, YouTube was like, my corner of YouTube was like, the skeptic atheist YouTube. And then I came back in 2013 and all of the people that I followed had become like right-wing shitheads. They'd become like, like reactionaries, and all they were complaining about was women and feminism and stuff. And I was like, what the hell's going on here? I missed out on prime meme culture. Yeah, I know. 2010 to 2013 was a year where the internet was going through some changes, and I was too busy going to class and writing essays and hanging out with people. And then as soon as I got back, that was when, as soon as I came back from university, that was when Gamergate was starting to happen. And so I came back, and that was like the thing that was happening. I'm like, oh, Jesus, what happened to the internet? Oh, the other one that I also found out was very Canadian was the show Mummies Alive. Mummies Alive was a Canadian show about a team of mummies that did anime girl transformations into armored forms that they then protected the reincarnation of the Pharaoh of Egypt who lived in San Francisco. And and they fought, They fought a guy named Scarab with a talking snake. And further along, that show also coined the term "let's kick some tut" as one of their goofy lines. It was a wild show. It was fascinating seeing a meme website schism between the far right and other folks like 9gag and Huge Lol, and then some Nazi off-brand site that got kicked from Huge Lol. You see, the thing is, I think 9gag's height was while I was in university, so I never really spent much time on that site. Biker Mice from Mars. I remember that show. I didn't watch it, but I do remember it. When I started getting a little bit older, in 2000 and stuff like that, I had a little anime phase as well, and I kind of stopped watching regular Western cartoons. And luckily that didn't last long because, I'm not really into anime anymore. But I had a little brief phase when I was maybe 13, 12, that kind of age. But luckily I got out of it before I could become a weeb. I don't think I've heard someone mention a single show that I've heard of since I got here. Let's see. There's some super Canadian ones like Camp Caribou or The Red Green Show, but that was more of a regular skit show. The Timeline Without Weeb Austin. Oh boy. Are you referring to Evil Tristan that lives in Austin? Maybe he'd be a weeb. Oh man. I meant to type Tristan, damn it. Sorry. No, it's okay. Just that we were talking about Evil Tristan a few weeks ago, and evil Mirror Universe Tristan, and I mentioned that my dad turned down a job working for NASA, and that if he hadn't turned it down, I would have spent the vast majority of my life growing up in Houston. And imagining what Houston raised Tristan would have been like was kind of wild. Cyber 6 was good. I remember that show. That was Teletoon. Everything changed when the Teletoon attacked. Because when I was a kid, we didn't have Teletoon. And then Teletoon arrived one day, which I think was like a NAFTA thing. Because Teletoon was basically Cartoon Network coming to Canada. And I can remember being super excited for Teletoon to the point where when the station was going to go live, like I remember this because it was the morning I was going to school, and I remember turning on the TV when Teletoon was coming, like they had like a countdown timer when the channel was going to start programming, because it was like the channel's coming this day. It was coming with like space and all that kind of stuff. So I remembered like just the countdown on the TV, and I'd be like, ah, shit, I gotta go to school, but then I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna watch a fuckload of what's it called? I'm gonna watch a fuckload of Teletoon. And then I watched Teletoon, and then there was that Teletoon changed it all. Teletoon had everything. It had The Simpsons. It had weird Sheridan College animation students' final projects at like 2 a.m. Yeah, man, I hit that channel hard. God, that takes me back. And now I haven't had cable in like I haven't had like, cable television in 13, 14 years now. Like, we got rid of cable at my house before I even moved out. Is the Mummy Show problematic, or is it okay because Egyptian religion no longer really exists? I mean, it's probably a little bit problematic, but not like to an obscene degree. No, I don't think so. Anyway, I could be wrong. Fox Kids. Oh yeah, I remember that. I do remember the only American channel that we got was Fox 24. That was from Buffalo. And yeah. I'm still mad I missed out on Simpsons on Teletoon. Yeah, there was a time when they played they had back-to-back episodes of The Simpsons at 9 o'clock. And you could watch at 9 and 9:30 2 episodes of The Simpsons, which was right before my bedtime. So I was like, yeah, let's do it. I also remember this one will come right back. I don't know why we're just like talking about 90s cartoons now, apparently. There was a show called Action Man, which I don't think lasted very long, but it was about a guy who did really cool stunts to save the day using math. Like, he had his supernatural power was that he could use math to figure out all of the right things he needed to do in order to make something cool happen. And it was literally like, the kids are going to love this, where it's going to be like, we're going to have Action Man, and he's going to be really cool. And his thing is that he saves the day with math. And it's like, oh God. Yeah. Did the UK Action Man also save the world with math? Action Man is what G.I. Joe is rebranded as in the UK. Oh. Okay, I think we're thinking of different things then. But yeah, I remember, oh man. This is just like, apparently this is Canadian nostalgia time. Toy Spies, having Murder Mystery. Anyway, UITV played the crossover episode of Blew My Mind, oh man. See, though, I think that like my last years watching YTV was when they were airing new episodes of Dragon Ball Z and another one, Gundam Wing. Those were like the big shows in my circle of friends when I was like, the 7th grade or whatever. Sort of when I came close to ending my time watching TV for the most part. Till it was the ending days of Deke. What's Deke? Now I gotta find it. Action Man is part of that. Okay. Okay. Deke Entertainment. Rebrands the Incredible World of Deke and Deke. Okay. International film and television production company that mostly associated with an animation studio. In addition to animated and live action shows, while under Disney, Deke produced live action things like Meet the Deedles and Inspector Gadget and licensed. Okay. And licensed various animes such as Sailor Moon, Saint Sienna, and Speed Racer X. Yeah, I do remember Deke being a thing. But it looks like I found the, yeah, it looks like Deke was behind that Action Man thing I was talking about. Action Man, here we go. Action Man 1995. Action Man is an American, Canadian, British children's animated TV show created by Deke Productions. The cartoon is based on the Hasbro name of the same name, or Hasbro line of toys in the same name. It also featured live action segments before and after the main show, which were filmed at Universal Studios, Hollywood, and Florida. Okay. They're not talking about math, though. I remember math being a big part of this. It was really silly. Canada just exports classic cartoons, doesn't it? It seems so, yeah. The thing is that, like, before NAFTA, Canada had so much of its own content. And then after NAFTA, like, when Teletoon started showing up, all of the American cartoons just kind of took over. I remember this. I remember Deke. Were Deke behind the people who did Dragon Ball Z and Gundam Wing? Because that's how I remember those shows being pretty big. And I guess you were saying that that was when they came near the end. God damn. This is too much. This is so many ancient memories. Now Canada just has Murdoch Mysteries. We still have shows, like, what's it called? BBC had that Kim's Convenience show that did really well. And one of the guys on that went on to do Shang-Chi. Then there was the other one. There was another show. Or the other person on that show was in an episode of the friggin' Mandalorian. So there you go. We got one. Then there was shows like Corner Gas that was extraordinarily the least funny TV show to ever exist. Yeah, Canada still does make content. It's just not like it used to be, I don't think. We have some Netflix series. Yeah, they got Annie with an I or whatever. That was that one. The Anne of Green Gables. Anne with an N. I don't remember anymore. It's been too long. But we did have an Anne of Green Gables show with Netflix at one point. Gundam is weirdly anti-war for a show about giant robots. Yeah, for real. My animation teachers in uni loved Canadian NFB Canadian cartoons. Does it still exist? NFB cartoons. What's that? Does Tusk count as a Canadian movie? Oh, man. Oh, like the Canadian National Film Board. Oh, man, I'm seeing some of these are classic. Like The Cat Came Back and stuff. Yeah, those are... I remember those when I was a kid. I think the National Film Board still makes animated stuff. I believe they still do. Does anyone... Okay, does anyone... Okay, you said the Anime in Green Gables animated series. Okay, I'll raise you one. Does anyone remember when they tried to make a show out of Little Orphan Annie where she, like, beats people up? Does anyone... I don't know why this is a show that exists in my brain. It must have existed where it's like Annie, like, from, like, Daddy Warbucks and Annie, but she fights. And I was like, what the fuck is this shit? Man, TV was weird. The 90s, they just had way too, like, what's it called? They had like 5 people making everything, and they the economy was doing so well that they just greenlit whatever, and so they made so many weird shows. Yeah, I gotta find the show where Little Orphan Annie fights. Do you remember the Pippi Longstocking cartoon? I remember that, but no, this is different. There was like a cartoon where like Annie was a badass, and I can't remember what it was anymore. Ooh, I think I might have found it. Here we go. Let's try this out. Let's try this. I think this might be it, because it'd be wild. It'd be wild for this to be the thing that we're looking for. Okay, let's get some. This is called Little Orphan Annie Cartoon is so dang weird.
Poor Annie. She looks like Ronald McDonald.
Oh yeah, here we go. This is definitely a show.
Warbucks is going to look exactly like Lex Luthor.
I'm willing to bet, actually.
Is Warbucks going to be like a Scrooge type? Oh my god, that's Lex Luthor. He doesn't know Punjab or...
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna like it.
Okay, I don't know. Because like it skips to like, yeah, when she's grown up here.
Oh, we're supposed to see him rotting in a grave and nobody liking him.
Yeah, there she is. That's like grown up badass fight nanny. God, I can't believe that was an actual thing. Okay, so it's not just some strange construction of my broken brain. That was a real thing that happened to. That was a real thing that somebody made in the 1990s and thought would be a real TV show. Did you know that the Little Orphan Annie comic ran from 1919 till 2010? Holy shit. That's a long cartoon. Man, comic strips just last forever, I guess. Hasn't, like, what's it called? Like, Garfield's been on the air longer than I've been alive. Or they've been making Garfield comic strips since longer than I've been alive. Kind of makes you think, like, Calvin and Hobbes ended kind of early as far as comic strips go. It's basically The Simpsons and South Park will last longer than time. Yeah, apparently. Man, yeah, I can see everybody's like leaving the stream over this. It's fine. It's fine. I just needed like, something a little bit nicer before I have to, what's it called? After this is over, I'm going and editing positive leftist news. So, just need a feel good day, I guess. So that's my next project. But yeah, the next positive leftist news is very full. There's lots of fun stuff going on. It's one of the few things that keeps the doomer away. Yeah, I love being part of it. And I got one, or I'm working on the next one right now. I have it done today so that Mexi can look at it tomorrow and then give me edits so that I can finish them on Friday, because I don't want to work on the weekend. And it needs to come out on the 1st, so, the huge. Finally, some positive leftist news with Mexi. What's it called? I made those videos, or what's it called? I at one point I accidentally removed the little like ding sound when Mexi winks at the opening animation of Positive Leftist News, and there were so many comments that were like, "Bring back the ding." And so, like, that was part of the project. I had to go and find the ding, and I guess I had accidentally deleted the ding. And so I remember that. That was like one of the more fun parts. But we've been doing Positive Leftist News now for over a year, so yeah. But Tristan, everyone's working for the weekend. Yeah, for real. This weekend I got to mail out all my Emmas. I got my 3 people who won Emma Goldman prints, so I got to go and send those out. And then I guess I got to get Halloween candy. I don't really eat candy, so I don't know what I'm going to do with the candy once I get it, but I'm going to get trick-or-treaters this year, so I kind of got to. Maybe I'll just like get a box, and then like the last kid who shows up, if I have a lot, I'll just be like, tonight's your lucky night, bud. So this is gonna be my first Thanksgiving, or sorry, my first Halloween since like 2016, I think, that I've actually been able to get trick-or-treaters. So that'll be really fun. Reinstate the ding. Don't give them candy. Give them a bride's version of the Communist Manifesto. It's what every kid wants. Yeah, it's what kids crave. Man, is there one thing that you could give a kid on Halloween that's worse than giving them, like, fruit? And that, yeah, give them a book. All right, everybody. I'm going to take a quick, I think it's time that we call it a week. I got to get to work. You guys, it's been real. We've been having a really fun time. We're going to raid MX Emily. Because she rules. Yeah. Be good to yourself. Be good to each other. Decolonize your mind. And I'll see you guys on Monday. Peace.